The morning light filtered through the tall windows of the Crescent Moon Pack's great hall, but Sera didn't see it. At least, that's what everyone believed. She kept her eyes carefully unfocused, her head tilted at the precise angle she'd perfected over 9 long years, the universal posture of the sightless. Her fingers traced the familiar grooves in the wooden table before her, a gesture she'd practiced until it became second nature. Around her, the breakfast hall buzzed with conversation, but she remained isolated in her carefully constructed darkness, a ghost in a world of light she pretended not to see. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Poor thing. She heard someone whisper nearby. 9 years since the accident, and still no wolf, no sight, no hope of a mate. The words stung, as they always did, but Sera had learned long ago that pain was preferable to the alternative. Being blind, being broken, it was her armor, her protection against the one fate she feared more than any other, the mating bond. She reached for her cup, her movements deliberate and slightly uncertain, exactly as they should be. The warmth of the tea seeped through the ceramic, grounding her in the lie she'd built her life around. "Sera," a gentle voice said beside her. It was Maya, one of the few people who showed her genuine kindness. "I've brought you fresh bread. It's still warm." "Thank you," Sera murmured, allowing a small smile. Maya's friendship was real, even if everything else about Sera's existence was carefully fabricated. What Maya didn't know, what no one knew, was that Sera could see every detail of her concerned face. The slight furrow between her brows, the way morning light caught the amber flecks in her brown eyes, the small flour stain on her apron from the kitchens. Sera saw everything. She always had. 9 years ago, when the accident supposedly stole her sight and prevented her wolf from emerging, it had actually been the answer to a desperate prayer. The night before her 18th birthday, the night she should have shifted for the first time and become eligible for mating ceremonies, Sera had done the unthinkable. She had bound her own wolf with ancient magic and blinded herself to the one thing that terrified her most, the fated mate bond her mother had died from. Her mother, Luna Ilara, had been the strongest woman Sera had ever known. Beautiful, powerful, beloved by the pack. And she had withered away within 3 years of losing her mate, Sera's father, to a border skirmish. Sera had watched the light fade from her mother's eyes, watched her become a shell, watched the mate bond slowly kill her from the inside out. "I can't live without him," her mother had whispered near the end, her hand clutching Sera's with desperate strength. "The bond, it's like having half your soul ripped away. Every breath is agony. Every heartbeat is wrong." Sera had been 15, old enough to understand, young enough to be traumatized. And she had made a vow over her mother's grave. She would never let a mate bond have that power over her. Never let another person become so essential that losing them meant losing herself. So she had researched, studied forbidden texts, and found a witch willing to help her for a price. The spell was dangerous, the consequences severe. She would have to maintain the deception perfectly, or the magic would consume her. But it was worth it. Anything was worth avoiding the fate that had destroyed her mother. "The Alpha King arrives today," Maya said, pulling Sera from her dark thoughts. There was an unusual excitement in her voice. "They say he's looking for his mate. Can you imagine? Every unmated she-wolf in the territory is hoping it's her." Sera's hand tightened around her teacup. The Alpha King. Kirin Volkov. Even in her self-imposed isolation, she'd heard the stories. Powerful beyond measure, ruthless in battle, haunted by some darkness that made him more beast than man at times. He ruled the northern territories with absolute authority, and his pack was the largest and most feared in all the lands, and he was unmated. At 32, he should have found his fated mate years ago. Rumor said he'd given up looking, that he planned to choose a mate of convenience for the sake of an heir. "I'm sure he'll find someone suitable," Sera said carefully, keeping her tone neutral. "Oh, but imagine if it were you," Maya said with innocent enthusiasm. "The blind Omega who became a queen. It would be like something from the old stories." Sera forced a smile, though her stomach churned. "That's not how fate works, Maya. An Alpha King needs a strong Luna, not someone broken like me." "You're not broken," Maya said fiercely, squeezing her hand. "Your wolf may be sleeping. but you're still one of the kindest, smartest people I did know." The words warmed her even as guilt twisted in her chest. Maya's faith in her was built on lies, but it was also one of the few genuine connections Sera had allowed herself. In her world of deception, Maya's friendship was a precious, dangerous thing. "I should go," Sera said, rising carefully from the bench. She picked up the walking stick. She'd carved herself worn smooth from years of use, another prop in her performance. "I have herbs to gather before the rain comes. Let me walk with you to the—" "No," Sera said, more sharply than intended. She softened her tone. "Thank you, but I know the path. I'll be fine." She'd perfected the art of gentle refusal, of maintaining just enough independence that people didn't question her too closely, while appearing vulnerable enough that they didn't expect too much. It was a careful balance, and she'd walked it for 9 years without faltering, until today. As Sera made her way through the pack house, tapping her stick against the stone floors in the rhythm she'd memorized, she didn't notice the figure watching her from the shadows of the upper gallery. Didn't feel the amber eyes tracking her every movement with an intensity that would have made her blood run cold. Alpha King Kiran Volkov had arrived earlier than announced, as was his habit. He preferred to observe his hosts before they had time to prepare their masks. And what he was observing now was very, very interesting. The blind Omega moved through the corridors with practiced ease, her stick tapping a steady rhythm. But there was something off about her movements, something his wolf recognized even if he couldn't quite name it yet. The way she tilted her head wasn't quite right. The slight hesitation before each step was too uniform, too perfect. He'd seen truly blind wolves before. Their movements were different, more cautious in unfamiliar spaces, more confident in known ones. This girl moved like someone following a choreographed dance, not someone navigating by memory and sound alone. Intrigued, Kiran followed at a distance as she made her way outside. She crossed the courtyard, heading toward the forest path that led to the medicinal gardens. Several pack members called greetings to her, which she returned with appropriate warmth. Everyone seemed to know her, to care for her. "Poor Sera," he heard someone murmur. Such a tragedy. The name struck him like a physical blow. Sera, Serafina Lightwood, daughter of the late Luna Ilara and Alpha Marcus. He'd known her parents, had fought alongside Marcus in the territorial wars 15 years ago. Marcus had been a good man, a strong alpha. His death had been a loss to all the packs. And this was his daughter? The girl who'd lost her sight and her wolf in some accident 9 years ago? Kiran remembered hearing about it, a fall, they'd said, or perhaps a rogue attack. The details had been vague. He watched as she entered the forest, moving along a narrow path with surprising confidence, for someone who supposedly couldn't see. His wolf stirred, interested in a way it hadn't been in years. There was something about her, something that called to him even from a distance. The scent of wild roses and rain reached him on the breeze. It was coming from her direction, sweet and clean and utterly intoxicating. His wolf surged forward in his mind, demanding he get closer, demanding he investigate this mystery. Kiran had learned long ago to trust his instincts. And right now, every instinct was telling him that Sera Lightwood was hiding something. He followed her deeper into the forest, moving silently through the underbrush. She walked the path with ease, her stick tapping occasionally but almost perfunctorily, as if she didn't really need it. When she reached a small clearing where medicinal herbs grew in wild abundance, she knelt and began gathering plants with practiced efficiency. But it was what happened next that confirmed his suspicions. A butterfly landed on a flower, directly in her line of sight. For just a moment, barely a heartbeat, her eyes tracked its movement. The focus was brief, instinctive, quickly corrected. But Kiran had been watching for exactly this kind of slip. She could see. The blind Omega could see, which meant she was perpetrating an elaborate deception. The question was why? What was Sera Lightwood hiding from? What was she so desperate to avoid that she'd fake blindness for 9 years? His wolf growled with interest, with possessiveness. "Mine," it whispered. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Liar or not, broken or whole, she's mine. Kiran pushed back against the instinct. He'd felt flickers of attraction before, mild pulls toward she-wolves who might be compatible. But this was different. This was deeper, more primal. It called to something in him that had been dormant for years. Could she be his mate? Was that what she was hiding from? The thought should have angered him. If she was his fated mate and she'd been concealing herself, evading the bond that was an insult to the moon goddess herself, a rejection of the most sacred connection their kind could experience. But instead of anger, he felt only curiosity and determination. If Sera Lightwood could see, he would prove it, and then he would understand why she'd built this elaborate cage around herself. Because something told him that beneath the lies, beneath the careful performance, was a woman worth knowing. A woman who might be exactly what his dark, cold existence needed. Sera was so focused on her gathering on maintaining the careful pretense of selecting herbs by touch and scent that she didn't notice him approach until he spoke. "Those are nightshade leaves you're about to pick." His voice was deep, resonant, carrying an authority that made her freeze. It rumbled through the clearing like distant thunder, raising the hair on the back of her neck. She knew that voice, had heard descriptions of it. The Alpha King. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she slowly lifted her head, keeping her eyes carefully unfocused. "I can tell by the texture," she said, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "The nightshade leaves are smoother than the comfrey I'm looking for." It wasn't entirely a lie. Nightshade leaves were indeed smoother. But she'd seen them perfectly well, and had been reaching for comfrey 3 inches to the left. "Is that so?" There was something in his tone, a note of skepticism that made her skin prickle with awareness. "And you can differentiate between poisonous and medicinal plants by touch alone?" "I've had 9 years to learn," Sera replied, shifting her hand to the correct plant with deliberate care. "When you lose one sense, the others compensate. My sense of touch and smell are quite acute now." She heard him move closer, his footsteps nearly silent on the forest floor. The scent of him reached her pine and winter storms and something wild that made her wolf stir in its magical cage. The wolf she'd bound so long ago was suddenly restless, pressing against the barriers she'd erected. No, she couldn't let it wake now. Not when the Alpha King was this close, watching her with what she could feel was intense scrutiny. "I'm Kieran Volkov," he said, though of course she already knew. Everyone in 100 miles knew who he was. "And you are Sera Lightwood, daughter of Marcus and Alara." "Yes, Your Majesty." She ducked her head in what she hoped was an appropriate show of respect. "I'm honored by your presence in our territory." "Are you?" Something in his voice made her uncertain. "You don't seem particularly honored. You seem—" He paused, and she could feel him studying her. "Nervous." "Forgive me," she said quickly. "I'm not accustomed to entertaining royalty. And she gestured vaguely at her eyes. "I'm not exactly fit company for an Alpha King." "Why not?" The question was so unexpected she almost looked directly at him. She caught herself just in time, keeping her gaze, slightly to the left of where she knew he stood. "I'm blind, Your Majesty, and wolfless. I can't shift, can't fight, can't—" she hesitated over the next words, "can't fulfill the duties expected of a normal pack member." "Who decided what duties are expected?" His voice had moved. He was circling her now, studying her from different angles. Sera forced herself to remain still, to not track his movement with her eyes. "From what I hear, you're an accomplished healer. You tend to the sick and injured. You know every medicinal plant in these forests, and you ask for nothing in return. Those sound like valuable duties to me." The unexpected praise made her chest tighten. She wasn't used to being seen as valuable, wasn't used to anyone looking past her disability to what she could actually do. "You're kind to say so," she murmured. "I'm not kind," he said, and suddenly he was directly in front of her, close enough that she could feel the heat of him. "I'm honest. Kindness is a weakness I can't afford." Without warning, his hand reached out. Sera's breath caught as she felt his fingers beneath her chin, tilting her face up. The touch was gentle but firm, commanding. She kept her eyes carefully unfocused, even as every nerve in her body screamed awareness of him. "Look at me," he said softly. It wasn't a request. It was a command from an Alpha King, backed by all the power of his bloodline. Most wolves couldn't resist that tone, that inherent authority. But Sera had spent 9 years building walls around herself, 9 years learning to resist instinct and command alike. "I am looking, Your Majesty," she said, keeping her voice steady. This is as much as I can offer." His thumb brushed across her cheek, and she suppressed a shiver. "Your eyes are beautiful," he murmured. "Gray, like storm clouds. It's a shame they don't work." There was something in his tone. Was it suspicion, skepticism, or just pity? Sera couldn't tell, and that terrified her. The Alpha King was known for his cunning, his ability to see through deceptions. If anyone could unravel her carefully constructed lies, it would be him. "Thank you," she whispered, unsure what else to say. He released her chin, but didn't step back. "I'm hosting a dinner tonight," he said. "For the unmated members of your pack. Your Alpha has agreed to let me meet potential," he paused, "companions during my stay." Sera's stomach dropped. A dinner for unmated wolves. That's what he was here for, to find a mate, or at least a suitable Luna for his pack. And she would be expected to attend, blind Omega or not. "I'm sure your Alpha will have many suitable she-wolves for you to meet," she said carefully. "I'm sure," he agreed. "But I want you there as well." "Your Majesty, I don't think—" "That wasn't a request, Sera Lightwood." His voice dropped lower, carrying an edge that raised goosebumps on her skin. "That was a command from your king. You will attend tonight's dinner. You will sit at my table. And you will help me understand something I find very, very curious." "What's that?" The question escaped before she could stop it. She felt him lean closer, his breath warm against her ear. "I want to understand how a blind Omega manages to move through the world without ever once bumping into anything. How she gathers poisonous plants without a single mistake. How her eyes," his hand came back to her face, his thumb just below her left eye, "react to changes in light even when she claims she can't see." Sera's blood turned to ice. He knew. Or he suspected. Either way, she was in danger. "I don't know what you mean," she said, but her voice had gone thin, unconvincing even to her own ears. "Don't you?" He pulled back, and she could hear the smile in his voice, predatory, knowing. Then tonight's dinner should be very enlightening. For both of us. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Sera kneeling in the clearing surrounded by herbs she'd forgotten. She was gathering. Her hands trembled as she pressed them against her thighs, trying to steady herself. The Alpha King suspected her deception. After 9 years of perfect performance, after countless interactions with pack members who never questioned her blindness, it had taken him less than an hour to see through her. She should run. Should pack her few belongings and disappear into the wild territories where no pack law could reach her. But running would be an admission of guilt, and worse, it would bring dishonor to her pack, to her father's memory. No, she would attend this dinner. She would maintain her deception perfectly, would give him no reason to doubt her disability. She'd been doing this for 9 years. She could do it for one more night. But even as she resolved to continue her performance, a small, traitorous part of her whispered the truth. The Alpha King's touch had awakened something in her she'd thought long buried. Something that responded to his nearness, his scent, his commanding presence. Something that felt dangerously like the beginning of a mate bond. Sera remained in the clearing long after the Alpha King's departure, her hands still trembling among the scattered herbs. The wild roses seemed to mock her with their sweet scent, mixing with the lingering trace of pine and winter storms that Kieran had left behind. She forced herself to breathe slowly, to think clearly. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Get yourself together," she whispered to the empty forest. "You've fooled everyone else. You can fool him too." But even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. Kieran Volkov wasn't like everyone else. He was an Alpha King, trained from birth to read deception, to see weakness, to identify threats. And somehow, with just one conversation, he'd looked past her carefully constructed blindness to the truth beneath. Sera gathered her herbs mechanically, forcing her hands to steady. She would need to be more careful tonight, more deliberate in her movements. No tracking motion with her eyes, no instinctive reactions to visual stimuli. She would have to be perfect. The walk back to the pack house felt longer than usual, every step weighted with dread. As she approached the main building, she could hear the commotion inside. Preparations for tonight's dinner were already underway. The entire pack seemed to be buzzing with excitement over the Alpha King's presence. "Sera," Maya's voice cut through her thoughts. "There you are. I've been looking everywhere for you." Sera turned toward the sound, her expression carefully composed. "What's wrong?" Wrong? Nothing's wrong. Maya's excitement was palpable. Everything's wonderful. The Alpha King specifically requested that you attend tonight's dinner. Can you believe it? You, personally invited to dine with royalty? Sera's stomach churned, but she managed a weak smile. I'm not sure that's appropriate, Maya. I'm hardly… Nonsense, Maya interrupted, linking her arm through Sera's. This is an honor, and between you and me… Her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. I think he was quite taken with you. That's ridiculous, Sera said too quickly. He barely spoke to me. Oh. And how would you know how long he spoke to you if you couldn't see him? Maya's tone was teasing, innocent, but the question sent a spike of alarm through Sera's chest. I could hear him leave. Sera recovered smoothly. It couldn't have been more than a few minutes. Well, minutes or not, he made quite an impression on everyone, and apparently you made an impression on him. Maya tugged her forward. Come on, we need to get you ready. I've already picked out a dress, it's the color of moonlight, absolutely perfect for your complexion. Sera allowed herself to be led, her mind racing. She needed to maintain her composure, needed to remember every detail of her performance. But something about Kieran's presence had shaken her in a way 9 years of deception hadn't prepared her for. It wasn't just that he suspected her secret. It was the way her body had responded to his nearness, the way her carefully caged wolf had stirred at his scent, the way something deep in her chest had pulled toward him, recognizing something her mind refused to acknowledge. No, she couldn't think about that, couldn't let herself consider what it might mean. In her small room, Maya had indeed laid out a dress, pale silver silk, that caught the afternoon light like water. It was beautiful, far finer than anything Sera usually wore. Her daily uniform consisted of simple, practical clothes that wouldn't draw attention. I can't wear this, Sera protested. It's too much. It's perfect, Maya insisted. Trust me, when I describe it to you, you'll understand. The silk is soft as a whisper, and the color, oh Sera, it will make your eyes look like liquid silver. Even if you can't see it, everyone else will, and they'll see you as you should be seen as, beautiful and worthy. Guilt twisted in Sera's chest. Maya's kindness was genuine, her friendship real. She deserved better than these lies. They all did. But the alternative revealing the truth was unthinkable. If the pack discovered she'd been deceiving them for 9 years, she would be banished, branded as a liar and a fraud. Worse, they might discover why she'd done it, might unearth the forbidden magic she'd used to bind her wolf. That kind of magic carried a death sentence. All right, Sera said softly. Help me get ready. As Maya fussed over her, chattering about the evening's preparations and speculating on which she-wolves might catch the Alpha King's attention, Sera tried to prepare herself mentally for what was coming. She would sit at his table, endure his scrutiny, and maintain her deception so perfectly that even he would have to accept it as truth. She had no other choice. The great hall had been transformed for the Jetter, evening's dinner. Torches blazed in their sconces, casting dancing shadows across stone walls adorned with ancient tapestries. Long tables had been arranged in a U-shape, with the head table elevated on a dais where the Alpha King would preside alongside the pack's leadership. Sera heard the descriptions as Maya guided her into the hall, painting a picture with words that Sera could see perfectly well with her own hidden sight. The room was magnificent, filled with the pack's unmated members, dozens of she-wolves in their finest dresses, and several young males who'd been deemed worthy of the Alpha King's company. He's already here, Maya whispered, her breath catching. Oh, Sera, he's even more imposing than the stories suggested. So tall, and those eyes, they're like molten gold in the torchlight. Oh, Sera didn't need Maya's description. She could see Kieran Volkov perfectly from across the room, and the sight of him made her breath catch despite herself. He stood at the head table, speaking with her pack's alpha, but his attention was elsewhere. Those amber eyes were scanning the crowd, searching. When they landed on her, she felt the weight of his gaze like a physical touch, even as she kept her own eyes carefully unfocused. He was magnificent, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair pulled back from a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. There was a savage beauty to his features, sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, and a mouth that seemed more accustomed to giving commands than smiling. He wore formal attire in deep black, the color of his pack, and he carried himself with the absolute confidence of a man who'd never doubted his own power. And he was watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness. "The Alpha King has requested you sit beside him," her pack's alpha daemon Frost said as he approached. His voice carried a note of confusion, as if he couldn't quite understand why the most powerful wolf in the wolf territories would want a blind, wolfless Omega at his side. "It's a great honor, Sera." "Of course, Alpha," Sera murmured, keeping her head bowed. "I'm grateful for his kindness." "See that you don't embarrass the pack," Damon said quietly, a subtle warning in his tone. He'd never been unkind to her, but he'd also never quite known what to do with her. The daughter of a respected alpha who'd become, through tragedy, a burden on pack resources. Maya squeezed her hand once before releasing her. "You'll do wonderfully," she whispered. "Just be yourself." If only Maya knew how impossible that was. A servant, young Thomas, who worked in the kitchens, appeared at her elbow. "Miss Sera, I'm to escort you to the head table." She nodded, placing her hand lightly on his offered arm. Together they made their way through the crowd, Sera counting steps, measuring distances, performing the careful dance she'd perfected over 9 years. She knew this hall intimately, could navigate it, to blindfold it if necessary. But she had to appear uncertain, had to hesitate just enough to seem dependent on her guide. As they approached the dais, she could feel multiple pairs of eyes on her. Some curious, some pitying, some she suspected resentful that a broken Omega had been given such a prominent position, while whole, healthy she-wolves had been overlooked. "Miss Sera Lightwood," Thomas announced, his voice carrying a note of nervousness as he addressed the Alpha King directly. "Thank you," Kieran's deep voice responded. "I'll take her from here." Sera felt Thomas's arm being replaced by a much larger, stronger one. Kieran's hand wrapped around her elbow with surprising gentleness, guiding her up the 2 steps to the raised platform with a steady, sure touch. "Careful," he murmured, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "There's a step here, and another. That's it." He was testing her, she realized with a flash of alarm, watching to see if she would instinctively place her feet correctly, or if she would rely on his guidance. She made sure to hesitate slightly, to feel for the edge of each step with her toes before committing her weight. "Thank you, Your Majesty," she said as they reached the top. "You're very kind to assist me." "Am I?" There was that note of dark amusement again. "I was under the impression I'd already told you I'm not kind." He guided her to a chair directly beside his own, holding it as she settled into place. The proximity was unnerving. She could feel the heat of him, could smell that intoxicating scent of pine and storms. Her wolf stirred again, pushing against its magical chains with an urgency that frightened her. "Stay down," she commanded silently. "Stay hidden." "You look lovely tonight," Kieran said as he took his own seat. "That dress suits you." "I'm told it's silver," Sera replied, keeping her voice steady. "My friend Maya selected it. She has excellent taste." "Indeed. The color brings out your eyes." He paused, and she could feel him studying her face. "They really are remarkable, you know. Like clouds before a storm." Sera didn't know how to respond to that, so she simply inclined her head in acknowledgement. Around them, the other guests were taking their seats. Sera could hear the rustle of silk and the murmur of excited conversation. Several she-wolves had been placed at the head table as well, all unmated, all presumably hopeful of catching the Alpha King's attention. Alpha King Volkov. A sweet voice said from across the table, "I'm Leanna Frost, Alpha Daemon's niece. It's an honor to have you in our territory." "The honor is mine, Miss Frost," Kieran replied with polite formality. Sera listened as Liana engaged him in conversation. She was skilled at it, asking about his journey, his pack, his impressions of their territory. Other she-wolves joined in, each trying to distinguish themselves, to capture a moment of his attention. But throughout it all, Sera could feel his focus, constantly returning to her. Even when he was responding to someone else's question, his awareness of her never wavered. The first course arrived, a delicate soup with herbs Sera recognized by scent. She reached for her spoon, gripping it the way a blind person would, using her fingers to locate it precisely before lifting it to the bowl. "Allow me," Kieran said suddenly. Before she could protest, his hand covered hers, guiding the spoon to the correct position in the bowl. "The soup is quite hot. I wouldn't want you to burn yourself. But..." His touch sent electricity racing up her arm. "I'm quite capable," she began. "I'm sure you are," he interrupted smoothly. "But indulge me. It would be a poor host who let his guest injure herself at his table." There was challenge in his voice, something that made her pulse quicken. He was pushing at her boundaries, testing her reactions, and she had no choice but to allow it without revealing anything. "You're very considerate, Your Majesty," she said, forcing a grateful smile. The dinner progressed in this manner, Kieran maintaining the appearance of helpfulness, while actually scrutinizing her every movement. He would pass her dishes with seemingly casual observations about their placement, describing the food in unnecessary detail, all while watching to see if her reactions matched those of someone truly blind. Sera navigated each test with careful precision. When he accidentally knocked a fork near the edge of the table, she didn't reach for it by sight but waited for the sound of it hitting the floor. When he moved her wineglass to a different position, she felt for it with exploring fingers before locating it. But the constant vigilance was exhausting. And worse, the proximity to him was doing something to her carefully maintained control. Her wolf was growing more restless by the minute, drawn to his presence in a way that terrified her. "Tell me, Sera," Kieran said during a lull in conversation. "What happened the night you lost your sight?" The table fell silent. It was a question no one asked anymore, a topic that had become taboo in the years since her accident. Sera felt every eye turn toward her, waiting for her response. "It was 9 years ago," she said quietly, the lie rolling off her tongue with practiced ease. "The night before my 18th birthday. I was walking near the old oak grove when I was attacked by a rogue wolf. She hesitated, letting pain color her voice. "It damaged my eyes and prevented my wolf from emerging. I'm told I'm lucky to be alive." "Lucky," Kieran repeated, something unreadable in his tone. "And this rogue was never found?" "No, Your Majesty. The trackers searched for weeks, but found no trace." "Interesting." He lifted his wineglass, and she could feel his eyes on her over the rim. A rogue powerful enough to prevent a wolf from emerging, yet it left no scent, no tracks, no evidence of its existence. That would be remarkable indeed. Her mouth went dry. He was questioning the story that had been accepted without question for 9 years, questioning the foundation of her entire deception. "The Alpha's trackers were thorough," Alpha Daemon interjected, his tone defensive. "I assure you, we searched extensively." "I don't doubt your thoroughness, Alpha Daemon," Kieran replied smoothly, merely observing that it's an unusual case. But then, his gaze returned to Sera. "Sera herself seems quite unusual." "Because I'm broken?" The words came out more sharply than she'd intended, years of suppressed frustration bleeding through. "Broken?" Kieran's voice dropped lower, intimate despite the crowded table. "I didn't say that. I said unusual. There's a difference." Before Sera could respond, a commotion at the far end of the hall drew everyone's attention. The massive oak doors burst open, and a messenger stumbled in, blood staining his clothes, his breathing ragged. "Alpha," the messenger gasped. "Rogues. A pack of them. They've attacked the southern border." Multiple casualties. The hall erupted in chaos. Alpha Daemon shot to his feet, already issuing commands. Warriors began mobilizing, the dinner forgotten in the face of immediate danger. "How many?" Kieran demanded, his voice cutting through the confusion with absolute authority. "At least 20, Your Majesty," the messenger replied, swaying on his feet. "Maybe more. They're organized, coordinated. This isn't a random attack." Sera's heart raced. Organized rogue attacks were rare and dangerous. Rogues typically traveled alone or in small groups, driven mad by the severing of pack bonds. But a large, coordinated group meant something else. Someone was controlling them, directing them. "I'm coming with you," Kieran said to Alpha Daemon, already rising from his seat. The dinner guests scattered as warriors assembled, preparing to defend their territory. In the chaos, Sera remained seated, her mind racing. This was exactly the kind of a situation where her deception became dangerous. If the pack house was attacked, if she needed to defend herself or flee, maintaining her blindness could cost her life. But breaking character now, In front of so many witnesses, Sera. Kieran's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. She looked up not quite at him, but in his general direction to find him standing beside her chair. Everyone else was focused on the emergency, on the preparations for battle. No one was watching them. "Your Majesty," she said softly. "When this is over," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "you and I are going to have a very long conversation about truth and deception, about what you're really hiding, and why." Her blood ran cold. "I don't know what you—" "Yes, you do." He leaned down, his breath warm against her ear. "And so do I. But right now, there are more pressing matters. Stay here. Stay safe. And Sera," he pulled back slightly. "Try not to save anyone with vision. You're not that supposed to have." With that cryptic warning, he strode away, leaving Sera frozen in her chair. He knew. Beyond doubt, beyond speculation, he knew her secret. And when he returned from battle, she would have nowhere left to hide. The great hall emptied rapidly as warriors mobilized for battle. Sera remained seated at the head table, her mind spinning with the implications of Kieran's parting words. Around her, she could hear the frightened whispers of those left behind, the elderly, the young, the non-warriors who would shelter in place while their pack defended the borders. "Sera." Maya appeared at her side, breathless and frightened. "Come on. We need to get to the safe room. Alpha's orders." The safe room was a reinforced chamber deep in the heart of the pack house, designed to protect the vulnerable in case of attack. Sera had been there during drills, knew every inch of it. But right now, the thought of hiding while others fought made her chest tight with frustration. For 9 years, she'd used her false blindness as an excuse to avoid combat training, to stay away from the dangerous aspects of pack life. It had been part of her strategy. The more useless she appeared, the less likely anyone would push her toward situations where a mate bond might form. But it also meant that now, when her pack faced real danger, she was expected to cower in darkness, while others risked their lives. "I'm coming," she said, letting Maya guide her down from the dais. They joined a stream of pack members heading toward the inner sanctum, but Sera's attention was divided. Through the windows, she could see warriors assembling in the courtyard, could see the grim determination on their faces as they prepared to face the rogue threat. And at the center of it all stood Kieran Volkov, his presence commanding even among seasoned warriors. He moved with lethal grace, issuing orders that Alpha Damon's fighters obeyed without question. The Alpha King was more than just a title, he was a weapon, honed by years of combat, and every line of his body spoke of controlled violence ready to be unleashed. Sera's wolf surged against its bonds again, desperate to break free, to run with him into battle. The primal instinct was nearly overwhelming, and for the first time in 9 years, Sera felt her control wavering. No, she couldn't. She wouldn't. But as she was led deeper into the pack house, away from the windows and the preparations for war, something inside her rebelled. This wasn't who she was meant to be hiding. Helpless, broken. Her parents had been warriors, leaders, strong in the face of danger, and she had thrown all of that away because she was afraid. The safe room was already crowded when they arrived. Omega mothers clutched their children. Elderly pack members settled onto benches with quiet resignation, and several younger wolves paced restlessly, clearly wishing they were old enough or strong enough to fight. "We'll be safe here," Maya said, trying to sound confident as she guided Sera to a bench against the wall. "The warriors will protect us, and with the Alpha King's help, those rogues don't stand a chance." Sera nodded mutely, but her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking about Kieran's words, about the way he'd looked at her with those knowing amber eyes. He'd seen through her deception, but instead of exposing her immediately, he'd given her a warning, a chance, perhaps, to come clean on her own terms, or a threat of what was to come when he returned. The heavy door of the safe room swung shut with a resounding boom, and the lock engaged with a series of metallic clicks. They were sealed in now, protected but also trapped. The only illumination came from oil lamps hanging from the ceiling, casting flickering shadows that danced across worried faces. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as they waited for news. Some pack members whispered prayers to the moon goddess, others sat, in tense silence, and a few quietly wept. Sera sat with her hands folded in her lap, her unfocused eyes staring at nothing, playing her role perfectly while her mind raced. She thought about her mother, about the mate bond that had destroyed her. She thought about the forbidden magic she'd used to bind her wolf, the price she'd paid for freedom from fate's design. And she thought about Kieran Volkov, about the way her body had responded to his nearness, the way her caged wolf had recognized something in him that her conscious mind refused to acknowledge. What if he was her fated mate? What if the moon goddess had paired her with the one wolf she couldn't possibly deceive, couldn't possibly hide from? It would be cruelly poetic, her punishment for defying the natural order. A sudden boom shook the building, causing several people to cry out in alarm. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and the oil lamps swayed dangerously on their hooks. "They're close," someone whispered. "The rogues are close." Another impact, this one even stronger. The sound of shattering glass echoed from somewhere above them, followed by snarls and screams. The battle had reached the pack house itself. "Stay calm," one of the elders commanded, but his voice shook. "The door will hold. We're safe here." But Sera's enhanced hearing, the one sense she hadn't had to fake improving, picked up sounds that others couldn't. Footsteps in the corridor outside, too light to be warriors in armor. Breathing, ragged and animalistic, and underneath it all, a scent that made her blood run cold. Rogue wolves, inside the pack house. They were heading toward the safe room. Her heart pounded as she realized the truth. Whoever was leading these rogues knew exactly where the vulnerable pack members would be sheltering. This wasn't a random attack. It was targeted, planned, and they were all sitting here, trapped, waiting to be slaughtered. "Maya," Sera whispered urgently, gripping her friend's arm. "Something's wrong. I can hear." She stopped herself, but too late. Maya was looking at her with sudden confusion. "Hear what? I don't hear anything." The scratching at the door started then, confirming Sera's fears. It was subtle at first, almost tentative, as if something was testing the barrier. Then came a low, guttural growl that sent terror racing through the room. "They're at the door!" someone screamed. Panic erupted. People surged away from the entrance, pressing toward the back of the room even though there was nowhere to go, no other exit. They were trapped, and everyone knew it. The scratching became pounding. The rogues were trying to break through, their snarls growing more frenzied. The door was reinforced, designed to withstand significant force, but Sera could hear the wood beginning to splinter under the assault. It wouldn't hold long. Around her, pack members were crying, praying, holding each other in terror. Maya clutched Sera's hand so tightly it hurt, her whole body trembling. And Sera made a decision. She couldn't let these people die. Couldn't let Maya die. Not when she had the power to do something about it. Even if it meant revealing everything she'd hidden for 9 years. "Maya," she said quietly, squeezing her friend's hand once before releasing it. "I'm sorry. For all of it." "What?" "Sera, what are you?" But Sera was already standing, already moving toward the door with steady, sure steps, no hesitation, no uncertainty, no blind person's careful navigation. She moved like what she was, a wolf who could see perfectly, who had been hiding her strength for far too long. Behind her, she heard gasps of shock, heard Maya's confused cry of, "Sera, how are you?" But there was no time for explanations. Sera reached deep inside herself, to the place where she'd buried her wolf 9 years ago. The magical chains she'd wrapped around her own nature felt like iron bands, and breaking them would hurt. The witch had warned her the binding could only be undone at great cost. It might kill her. It might drive her mad. But it was a price she was willing to pay. "I'm sorry, Mother," she whispered to the memory of the woman who died from a broken mate bond. "But I can't be afraid anymore." She pulled at the magical chains, ripped at them with all her will and strength. They resisted, fighting back, sending waves of agony through her body. It felt like being torn apart from the inside, like every nerve was on fire. But slowly, agonizingly, they began to break. The door splintered further. Rogue claws pushed through the gaps, reaching for prey. Sera could see them clearly now, could see the madness in their eyes, the corruption that had twisted them into monsters. With a final, desperate surge of will, Sera shattered the last of the magical bindings. Her wolf exploded into consciousness with a howl that shook the very foundations of the room. Power flooded through her body. 9 years of suppressed strength, released in a single, glorious moment. Her eyes blazed with silver light as her wolf surged to the surface, demanding freedom, demanding blood. The transformation took her in seconds. Where Sera Lightwood had stood, a silver wolf now crouched larger than most she-wolves, with fur that gleamed like moonlight and eyes that held an ancient, terrible wisdom. The rogues at the door froze, sensing a threat they hadn't anticipated. Behind her, the pack members in the safe room were utterly silent, shocked into stillness by the impossible sight before them. The blind, wolfless Omega had been a lie. Everything had been a lie. But there would be time for reckoning later. Right now, there were rogues to kill. Sera launched herself at the door with all her newfound strength, slamming into it from the inside. The impact sent the rogues stumbling backward into the corridor. She crashed through the weakened wood, exploding into the hallway in a shower of splinters. 3 rogues faced her mangy, corrupted things with yellow eyes and foam at their mouths. They were larger than her, battle-scarred and vicious. Under normal circumstances, a single she-wolf against 3 rogues would be suicide. But Sera wasn't normal. She'd never been normal. The first rogue lunged at her, jaws snapping. She sidestepped with fluid grace, her enhanced senses reading its movements before they happened. Her teeth found its throat, and she tore with savage efficiency. The rogue dropped, choking on its own blood. The other 2 attacked together, trying to overwhelm her with coordinated strikes. But 9 years of suppressed instinct came roaring back, muscle memory from a bloodline of warriors flowing through her veins. She was her father's daughter, her mother's heir, and she had been bred for this. She fought with primal fury, with the desperation of someone who'd been caged for too long. Claws and teeth, blood and violence, it was terrible and beautiful and completely, utterly freeing. The second rogue fell. Then the third. Sera stood in the corridor, panting, her silver fur stained with blood that wasn't hers. Behind her, through the shattered door, she could hear the shocked silence of the pack members she'd just saved. And in that silence, one word echoed through her mind, spoken in a voice that made her entire body freeze. Mate. She turned slowly, knowing what she would see even before her eyes confirmed it. Kieran Volkov stood at the end of the corridor, returned from battle, blood-splattered and magnificent. His amber eyes were locked on her wolf form with an intensity that stole her breath. His own wolf was visible just beneath the surface, golden eyes glowing with recognition and possessive hunger. The mate bond snapped into place between them like a physical cord, golden and silver light intertwining in the space that separated them. It was overwhelming, undeniable, everything her mother had described, and everything Sera had feared for 9 years. She felt his, emotions flooding through the bond, shock, recognition, triumph, and beneath it all, a fierce, possessive claiming that made her wolf whimper with instinctive submission even as her mind rebelled. Mine, Kieran's wolf growled, his voice barely human. My mate. Finally, Sera shifted back to human form, aware of her nakedness but too overwhelmed to care. She stood before him, silver eyes meeting amber, the truth finally laid bare between them. You knew, she said, her voice rough from disuse in her wolf form. You knew what I was hiding. I suspected you could see, Kieran said, moving toward her with predatory grace. But this, his gaze raked over her, taking in every detail. This is so much more than I imagined. 9 years, Sera. You've been hiding your wolf for 9 years. Why? Around them, pack members were emerging from the safe room, staring at the carnage, at the 3 dead rogues, at Sera standing naked and unashamed before their alpha king. Maya pushed in front of the crowd, her face a mixture of shock and betrayal. Sera? Her friend whispered. You could see? You could shift? All this time? The pain in Maya's voice cut deeper than any claw. But before Sera could respond, before she could even begin to explain, Alpha Daemon appeared with his warriors, taking in the scene with wide eyes. What is the meaning of this? He demanded, looking between Sera and Kieran. Sera, you killed these rogues? But you're supposed to be... She's not blind. Kieran interrupted, his voice carrying absolute authority. She's never been blind. And her wolf, he looked at Sera with something like awe, is magnificent. She's been playing you all for fools. That's not... Sera began, but Alpha Daemon cut her off. Is this true? His voice was cold, commanding. Answer me, Sera. Have you been deceiving this pack for 9 years? Every eye in the corridor was on her. Every person she'd lived among, shared meals with, accepted help, from all of them staring with expressions ranging from shock to anger to betrayal. And at the center of it all was Kieran, the mate she'd tried so desperately to avoid, connected to her now by a bond she could never break. The truth would destroy her carefully constructed life. But the truth had already been revealed in the most dramatic way possible. "Yes," she said finally, lifting her chin with hard-won dignity. "I've been deceiving you, all of you, for 9 years." The gasps and angry murmurs that followed were expected. What she didn't expect was for Kieran to step between her and the crowd, his massive body shielding her from their outrage. "She is mine," he said, his voice brooking no argument. "My fated mate. Any judgment, any punishment that is between her and me. Does anyone wish to challenge my claim?" Silence. No one would dare challenge an alpha king over his mate, regardless of what she'd done. "Good," Kieran said. Then he turned to Sera, his amber eyes blazing, with a mixture of anger and possessive heat. "You and I need to talk, now." Before she could respond, he scooped her up in his arms, cradling her naked form against his chest as if she weighed nothing. The intimacy of it, combined with the mate bond now thrumming between them, sent electricity racing through her body. "We're not done here," Alpha Daemon protested. "Yes," Kieran said flatly, already carrying Sera down the corridor. "You are." As he carried her away from the shocked crowd, away from the life she'd built on lies, Sera felt the full weight of her choices crashing down on her. She'd saved her pack, revealed her deception, and bound herself to the one wolf she'd sworn never to need. The mate bond pulsed between them with every step he took, pulling tighter, demanding acknowledgement. And despite everything, despite her fear, her anger, her desperate need for independence, part of her responded to it with a yearning she couldn't deny. "Where are you taking me?" she asked quietly. Kieran's arms tightened around her. "Somewhere private, where you're going to tell me everything. And I mean everything, Sera. No more lies, no more deception." His amber eyes met hers, and in their depths she saw not just anger, but something deeper. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred damaged spirit. "And then," he continued, his voice dropping to a possessive growl that sent shivers down her spine, "we're going to discuss exactly what it means that the moon goddess paired me with a woman who spent 9 years running from the very thing I've been searching for." The weight of prophecy settled over Sera like a cloak. The elder's blessing from that other ceremony echoed in her mind, words that seemed written for them. What begins as pretense will become truth. Her pretense of blindness had ended, but what truth would emerge from the ashes of her deception? And more terrifying, could she survive loving the mate she'd sworn never to need, when she'd watched that same bond destroy her mother from the inside out? The questions haunted her as Kieran carried her through the damaged pack house, toward a reckoning 9 years in the making. Kieran carried Sera through the corridors with purposeful strides, his arms a steel cage around her naked form. She could feel the controlled fury radiating from him, mixing with something else, a possessive hunger that made her wolf whimper with confused longing. The mate bond pulsed between them like a living thing, golden and silver threads weaving tighter with every heartbeat. He kicked open the door to what appeared to be a private guest chamber, luxuriously appointed with dark wood furniture and a massive bed draped in deep blue silk. The irony wasn't lost on Sera. This was likely where he'd intended to sleep during his visit, never knowing his fated mate was hiding in plain sight just corridors away. Kieran set her down with surprising gentleness, then immediately stripped off his own, blood-stained shirt and wrapped it around her shoulders. The garment swallowed her smaller frame, falling to mid-thigh, and it carried his scent so strongly that her wolf nearly purred with satisfaction. "Don't," she said, trying to push the shirt away even as her traitorous body wanted to burrow into it. "I don't need—" "You're naked and in shock," he interrupted, his voice rough. "And you're my mate, so yes, you need it. Let me have this one small courtesy before we tear each other apart with the truth." The raw honesty in his words stopped her protest. She pulled the shirt tighter around herself, hating how right it felt, how the mate bond sang with approval at being wrapped in his scent. Kieran moved to a cabinet and poured 2 generous measures of amber liquid into crystal glasses. He returned and pressed one into her hands. "Drink. You're going to need it." Sera took a sip and nearly choked, It was whiskey strong, expensive, and it burned all the way down. But it also steadied her, cutting through the shock and adrenaline that had been keeping her upright. "Now," Kieran said, his amber eyes pinning her with uncomfortable intensity. "Tell me everything." "And Sera," his voice dropped to a dangerous purr. "If you lie to me again, mate or not, there will be consequences." Where did she even begin? 9 years of deception couldn't be unwound in a single conversation. But the mate bond demanded honesty, pulled at her to bare her soul to this man, who was now inextricably linked to her very existence. "My mother died when I was 15, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "She and my father were true mates, fated by the moon goddess, perfectly matched in every way." She took another sip of whiskey, needing the burn. "When my father was killed in a border skirmish, the mate bond nearly destroyed her. I watched her waste away for 3 years, watched her become a shell of herself. She couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, could barely breathe without him." Kieran's expression softened slightly, understanding flickering in his eyes. "The mate sickness. It's rare but devastating. She told me," Sera's voice cracked, "she told me it felt like half her soul had been ripped away, that every moment without him was agony, that the bond was supposed to be a blessing, but it had become a curse she couldn't escape." She met Kieran's gaze directly for the first time. "She died 3 weeks before my 18th birthday, and I vowed over her grave that I would never let a mate bond have that power over me." "So, you bound your wolf," Kieran said, pieces clicking into place. "Before it could emerge, before you could scent your mate or be scented in return. You used forbidden magic to cage your own nature." "Yes." The admission felt like a stone dropping into still water, ripples of consequence spreading outward. "I found a witch who dealt in old magic, dark magic. She warned me the spell would require constant maintenance, that breaking it could kill me, but I didn't care. I was willing to pay any price to avoid my mother's fate." Kieran was silent for a long moment, his jaw tight. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "And the blindness?" "Part of the deception," Sera admitted. "If I couldn't shift, people would ask questions, would wonder why. But if I was also blind, damaged in some tragic accident, then I became an object of pity rather than suspicion. No one questions the blind, wolfless Omega. They just feel sorry for her and leave her alone." For 9 years. There was something like wonder in his voice, mixed with frustrated admiration. "You maintained this deception for 9 years without a single slip. That takes remarkable discipline." "Or remarkable fear," Sera countered bitterly. "I was so terrified of the mate bond that I was willing to live half a life, to cut myself off from everything that makes us what we are. I was a coward." "No." Kieran's hand shot out, gripping her chin and forcing her to meet his eyes. "You were a traumatized child who watched her mother die a slow, agonizing death. You did what you thought you needed to survive. That's not cowardice, that's desperation." The understanding in his voice nearly broke her. She'd expected anger, rejection, disgust at her deception. Not this fierce protectiveness, this instinctive defense of her choices. "You suspected from the beginning," she said, changing the subject before the emotion overwhelmed her. "How?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Your movements were too perfect. Truly, blind wolves navigate differently, more hesitantly in new spaces, more confidently in familiar ones. But you moved the same way everywhere, following a choreographed pattern rather than genuine adaptation." He traced his thumb along her jaw, the touch sending sparks through the mate bond. "And your eyes, they tracked movement, reacted to light changes. Small things, barely noticeable, but I've spent years learning to read deception." "So you tested me," Sera said, remembering the dinner, the deliberately placed obstacles. "The fork, the wine glass, all of it." "All of it," he confirmed. "Though I didn't expect," he gestured toward the corridor where she'd slaughtered 3 rogues, "that your wolf is powerful, Sera. Far more powerful than it should be after being bound for 9 years. That kind of strength doesn't just disappear." "It was compressed," she said, "like a spring coiled tighter and tighter. When I finally released it," she shuddered, remembering the agony and ecstasy of breaking the binding. It nearly tore me apart from the inside, but I couldn't let those people die. Couldn't let Maya die because I was too afraid to be what I really am. Kieran studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he drained his whiskey in one swallow and set the glass down with deliberate care. You saved your pack tonight, killed 3 rogues, single-handedly protected the vulnerable. That's not the action of a coward or a fraud. That's the action of a true Luna. I'm not a Luna, Sera protested. I'm not anything. I'm just, you're my mate. The words were a low growl, possessive and undeniable. The moon goddess herself chose you for me, and I've been searching for you for 15 years. Do you have any idea how long I've waited? How many false hopes I've followed? The raw pain in his voice stopped her cold. For the first time, she truly looked at him not as a threat to her independence, but as a man. A powerful, lonely man who'd been searching for his other half while she'd been hiding from hers. Tell me, she said softly. Tell me your story, Kieran. If I'm bearing my soul, you owe me the same. He moved to the window, staring out at the night sky where smoke still rose from various parts of the territory. When he spoke, his voice was distant, haunted. I became alpha at 16 when my father was killed in a challenge. Too young, too inexperienced, but the pack needed strength, and I was all they had. He turned to face her, and she saw centuries of weariness in his amber eyes despite his relatively young age. I spent the next 16 years building our territory, fighting off challenges, consolidating power, and through all of it, I searched for my mate, for the one person who could stand beside me, who could share the burden of leadership. But you never found her, Sera said quietly. I found echoes, hints of possibility. She-wolves who might have been compatible, who showed promise. His jaw tightened. But none of them were you. None of them made my wolf howl with recognition. None of them completed the part of me that's been hollow for so long. He crossed back to her, kneeling so they were eye to eye. The position should have been submissive, an alpha king kneeling before anyone was unheard of, but somehow it made him seem more powerful, more dangerous. When I saw you in that clearing, gathering herbs with such careful deception, something in me knew. My wolf recognized you even before I understood what I was seeing. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb stroking across her cheekbone. You are mine, Sera Lightwood. You have been mine since the moment the moon goddess wove our souls together. And you've been running from me before we ever met. Yes, she whispered, unable to lie with the mate bond burning between them. I've been running. I'm still running, even now. Why? The question was barely audible, but it carried the weight of desperate need. Why do you fear this so much? I would never harm you, never abandon you. The mate bond doesn't have to be what your parents had. It can be different. We can make it different. Can we? Sera pulled back, wrapping her arms around herself. My mother was strong, Kieran. One of the strongest Lunas in generations. And the mate bond still destroyed her. What makes you think I'm any different? What makes you think I can survive losing you when she couldn't survive losing my father? Because you're not your mother, Kieran said fiercely. And I'm not your father. We are our own people, with our own story to write. But what if you're wrong? The words burst out of her, raw and terrified. What if I let myself love you, let myself need you, and then I lose you? What if I become like her, a shell, a ghost, slowly dying because half my soul is gone? Then we fight, Kieran said simply. We fight like hell to stay alive, to stay together, because the alternative, a life half-lived, hiding from the very thing that could make us whole, that's not living at all. That's just existing. And you've been doing that for 9 years, Sera. Is that really what you want? Another 60 years of pretending to be less than you are? His words hit like physical blows, stripping away her carefully constructed justifications. He was right. She'd been so busy protecting herself from potential, pain that she'd guaranteed herself actual pain, the ache of loneliness, the grief of never knowing what she could have been. I'm terrified, she admitted, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. I'm so terrified of this bond, of needing you, of what it will do to me. I know. Kieran pulled her into his arms, cradling her against his chest as she finally let herself break. I know, little wolf. And I would never force this bond on you. If you truly cannot accept it, If the fear is too great, his voice roughened with pain, I'll find a way to break it. I'll set you free, even if it destroys me. The offer shocked her. Breaking a mate bond was supposed to be impossible, and even attempting it was agonizing. For him to offer that, to be willing to endure that torture for her freedom. You would do that? She whispered against his chest. You would break the bond? I would do anything for you. His arms tightened around her. Even let you go, because that's what love is. Sera, it's not possession or control. It's wanting the other person's happiness more than your own. Something inside her cracked open at those words. All her life, she'd equated the mate bond with loss of control, with dangerous dependency. But what Kieran was offering wasn't control, it was choice. The freedom to choose him, or to choose herself, without coercion or manipulation. For the first time in 9 years, she let herself truly feel the mate bond instead of fighting it. Let herself experience the golden warmth of their connection, the way their souls recognized and called to each other. It wasn't the terrifying cage she'd imagined. It was beautiful, she breathed, looking up at him in wonder. The bond is beautiful. Kieran's eyes blazed with hope. You feel it? I've been feeling it since the moment you touched me in the clearing, she admitted. But I was so afraid, I wouldn't let myself acknowledge it. Wouldn't let myself see what it really was. And now? His voice was rough with barely restrained emotion. What do you see now? Sera took a shaky breath, her hands coming up to frame his face. I see a man who's been searching for me while I was hiding. I see strength and loneliness and a kindness he tries to hide behind authority. I see, her voice broke, I see home. And it terrifies me. Then be terrified with me, Kieran said, pressing his forehead to hers. Be terrified and choose me anyway. Choose us. I can't promise I'll never die, Sera. None of us can. But I can promise I'll fight like hell to stay with you. And I can promise that every day we have together will be worth whatever comes after. The tears were flowing freely now, but they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of release, of finally letting go of the fear that had controlled her for so long. My mother's bond destroyed her because she couldn't imagine a life without my father, Sera said slowly, working through the realization even as she spoke it. But that wasn't the bond's fault. That was her choice to stop living when he died. The bond didn't kill her. Grief did. Yes, Kieran confirmed gently. The bond amplifies what's already there. Love, yes, but also strength, resilience, the will to survive. Your mother made her choice, but you, Sera, you're a survivor. You've proven that 1,000 times over. She was. She'd survived her parents' deaths, survived 9 years of living a lie, survived the agony of breaking her own binding. She was stronger than she'd ever given herself credit for. And maybe, just maybe, she was strong enough for this. I'm still afraid, she said, meeting his amber eyes directly. I don't know if that fear will ever completely go away. I don't need you to be fearless, Kieran replied. I just need you to be willing. Willing to try, to take this one day at a time, to let me prove that the bond can be a blessing instead of a curse. Sera searched his face, looking for any sign of dishonesty or manipulation. But all she saw was raw, honest hope. He was just as vulnerable as she was in this moment, offering his heart with no guarantee she wouldn't crush it. The old Sera, the one who'd bound her wolf and hidden for 9 years, would have run, would have found a way to escape, to protect herself at any cost. But the new Sera, the one who'd slaughtered rogues to protect her pack, who'd broken her own binding despite the agony, she was brave enough to take a different path. Okay, she whispered. Kieran went very still. Okay? Okay. She said it stronger this time. I choose you. I choose us. I'm terrified and I'm going to make mistakes. But, she took a deep breath, I'm willing to try, if you'll be patient with me. The smile that broke across Kieran's face was devastating in its beauty. It transformed his harsh features into something radiant, and for the first time, Sera saw the man beneath the Alpha King younger, lighter, freed from some of the darkness he'd carried alone for so long. I'll be patient, he promised. I'll be whatever you need me to be. Then he kissed her. The mate bond exploded between them at the first touch of their lips, golden and silver light intertwining until there was no distinction between them. It was overwhelming and perfect, terrifying and right. Sera felt his emotions flooding through the bond relief. Joy, possessive hunger, and underneath it all, a love so fierce it took her breath away. And to her shock, she felt her own emotions flowing back to him, the fear, yes, but also hope, wonder, and the first tentative stirrings of something that might become love if given time to grow. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. "Mine," he murmured, the word, a prayer, and a promise. "Yours," Sera agreed, testing the word on her tongue. It didn't feel like surrender. It felt like claiming something for herself. "And you're mine, always," Kieran confirmed. "From the moment you were born, I've been yours. I just had to wait for you to be ready to claim me." They stood there for a long moment, wrapped in each other's arms, letting the mate bond settle into something stable and strong between them. Sera could still feel the fear lurking at the edges of her consciousness, but it was manageable now. With Kieran's strength supporting her, with his unwavering confidence in them, she could face it. "We should talk about what happens next," Kieran said eventually, though he seemed reluctant to move. "Your pack will have questions, so will mine." "I know." Sera sighed, reality reasserting itself. "I deceived them for 9 years. They have every right to be angry." "You also saved their lives tonight," Kieran pointed out. "That has to count for something." "Maybe." She wasn't convinced. The betrayal of her long deception would be hard for many to forgive, especially Maya and the others who'd shown her genuine kindness. "We'll face it, together," Kieran said firmly. "You're not alone anymore, Sera. You have me, and through me, you have an entire pack of the strongest warriors in the territories. Anyone who wants to harm you will have to go through me first." The fierce protectiveness in his voice made her wolf purr with satisfaction. "I'm not sure that's going to help my reputation. The fraud who hid behind the Alpha King's power." "Then we'll change the narrative," Kieran said with absolute confidence. "You're not a fraud. You're a survivor who did what she had to do to protect herself from unbearable pain. And now you're a Luna, my Luna, who will help me lead the Northern Territories with strength and wisdom." "I don't know how to be a Luna," Sera protested weakly. "You'll learn." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "And I'll teach you. We have time, Sera. Years and years of time to figure this out together." The promise of a future of years stretching ahead instead of just days of careful survival was almost too much to comprehend. But as she stood there in Kieran's arms, wrapped in his shirt and his scent, connected to him through the golden cord of their mate bond, Sera let herself imagine it. A life where she didn't have to pretend, where she could be her full self, wolf and woman, strong and vulnerable, where she could love and be loved without the crushing fear that had defined her existence for so long. It was terrifying, but it was also the most beautiful thing she'd ever dared to dream. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For seeing through my lies, for not letting me hide." She looked up at him, silver eyes meeting amber. "For being patient enough to let me choose you instead of forcing the bond." Kieran's expression softened. "You're worth the wait, little wolf. You're worth everything." And in that moment, with the mate bond singing between them and the promise of tomorrow shimmering on the horizon, Sera finally understood what her mother had tried to tell her all those years ago. The mate bond wasn't a curse. It was a gift, one that could destroy you, yes, but only if you let fear control you. If you faced it with courage, with an open heart and a willing spirit, it could be the most beautiful, transformative force in existence. Her mother's story had ended in tragedy, but Sera's story, hers and Kieran's together, was just beginning, and she was finally ready to write it. 3 months later, Sera stood on the balcony of the Northern Territories' royal palace, watching the sun set over mountains she'd never thought she'd see. The view was breathtaking, all purple shadows and golden light, wild and beautiful and free. Behind her, she heard Kieran's footsteps, recognized them without turning. The mate bond hummed with awareness of his approach, warm and comfortable now that she'd stopped fighting it. "Thinking about something serious?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. "Thinking about how different everything is," Sera admitted, leaning into his warmth. 3 months ago, I was pretending to be blind, hiding from the world. Now she gestured at the palace, the territory spread below them, a Luna. It still doesn't feel real. You're more than a Luna, Kieran murmured against her hair. You're the heart of this pack. They love you, Sera. I've never seen warriors so devoted to their Luna. It was true. Despite her rocky start, despite the revelation of her deception, Kieran's pack had welcomed her with surprising warmth. They respected strength, and she'd proven hers 100 times over in the months since their bonding. Maya wrote again, Sera said, touching the letter in her pocket. She's forgiven me. Says she understands why I did what I did, even if it hurt. That's good. Kieran pressed a kiss to her temple. I know her friendship matters to you. It did. Maya's forgiveness had been the last piece Sera needed to truly let go of her guilt. Her old pack had been less forgiving. Alpha Daemon had exiled her, claiming she'd brought dishonor to their territory. But Kieran had welcomed the judgment, saying it freed Sera to join his pack without political complications. Sometimes Sera wondered if Kieran had somehow arranged that exile. But she'd learned not to question his methods too closely. Are you happy? Kieran asked suddenly, vulnerability coloring his voice. Truly happy? Or do you still feel trapped by the bond? Sera turned in his arms, cupping his face between her hands. I'm happy, she said, and meant it. Terrified sometimes, yes. The fear doesn't just disappear, but happy. Happier than I ever thought I could be. Good. He kissed her softly, thoroughly, until they were both breathless. Because you're stuck with me now, little wolf. For better or worse, for all the years we have. I know. Sera smiled against his lips. And I'm finally okay with that. The mate bond glowed between them, golden and silver and absolutely unbreakable. Not a cage, she'd learned, but a foundation. Not a weakness, but a source of strength. Her mother's fear had come true in the worst possible way. But Sera's story was different. She'd chosen her mate with open eyes, had walked into the bond, knowing the risks and accepting them. And every day, she chose him again. Chose strength over fear. Chose love over loneliness. It was the hardest, bravest thing she'd ever done, and it was worth it. 1 year later, the ceremonial hall of the Northern Territory Palace was filled to capacity, packed with representatives from every major pack in the 5 territories. Sera stood before the ancient mirror in her private chambers, barely recognizing the woman staring back at her. Gone was the drab, shapeless clothing of the blind Omega. In its place was a gown of silver silk that flowed like liquid moonlight, embroidered with golden thread that caught the light with every breath. Her hair, once kept deliberately plain, now cascaded in elaborate braids woven with winter roses, Kieran's favorite, and her eyes, those storm-gray eyes she'd kept carefully unfocused for so long, now blazed with confidence and purpose. Today was her official coronation as Luna Queen of the Northern Territories. You look like a goddess, Maya breathed from behind her. Her old friend had traveled 3 weeks to be here, had forgiven Sera completely and now served as one of her ladies-in-waiting. The moon goddess herself would be jealous. I look terrified, Sera corrected, though she managed a smile. There are over 500 people out there, Maya. 500 pairs of eyes watching to see if the fraud who pretended to be blind for 9 years is worthy of being their queen. You're not a fraud. The deep voice came from the doorway. Kieran stood there in his formal regalia, black leather and silver armor that made him look every inch the warrior king he was. But his amber eyes were soft as they found hers in the mirror. You're a survivor, and you're already their queen in everything but title. Maya tactfully excused herself, leaving them alone. Kieran crossed the room in long strides, standing behind Sera and meeting her gaze in the reflection. I had a vision last night, Sera said quietly. About my mother. Kieran's hands came to rest on her shoulders, grounding her. Tell me. She was standing in a field of silver flowers, and she was smiling, really smiling, the way she used to before my father died. Sera's voice thickened with emotion. She told me she was proud of me, that I'd found a different path than hers, a stronger one, that the mate bond doesn't have to end in tragedy if both wolves are willing to fight for it. She was right, Kieran murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. We fight for each other every day. That's what makes us different. It was true. Their bond hadn't been easy. There had been arguments, moments of crushing fear when Kieran went into battle, nights when Sera's old terrors resurfaced, and she'd wake up panicking about losing him. But they'd faced each challenge together, had learned to communicate through the bond, had built something stronger than either of them could have created alone. "I'm ready," Sera said, squaring her shoulders. "Let's go show them who their Luna Queen really is." Kieran's smile was fierce with pride. "That's my mate." They walked together through the palace corridors, their steps perfectly synchronized. The mate bond thrummed between them, steady and strong, no longer a source of fear, but of comfort. Through it, Sera could feel Kieran's absolute confidence in her, his unwavering belief that she was exactly where she belonged. The ceremonial hall fell silent as they entered. 500 faces turned toward them: alphas, betas, warriors, diplomats, healers, representatives from every pack, including several from her old territory. Sera held her head high, refusing to let old shame bow her shoulders. At the front of the hall stood the High Council of Elders, the same ones who'd blessed dozens of matings over the years. The head elder, the white-haired woman who'd given that prophetic blessing so long ago, smiled knowingly as they approached. "Alpha King Kieran Volkov," she intoned, her voice carrying through the vast space. "You stand before the assembled packs to present your chosen mate for the blessing of coronation. Speak her name and her worth." This was the traditional challenge the Alpha King had to publicly declare why his mate deserved to rule beside him. Some kept it brief, listing bloodlines and political advantages. But Kieran had never been traditional. "I present Sera Lightwood," he said, his voice ringing with authority and something deeper. "Love, pride, possession. Daughter of Alpha Marcus and Luna Ilara, both of blessed memory. She comes from a bloodline of warriors and leaders, but that's not why she stands here today." He turned to face Sera, directly, amber eyes blazing. "She stands here because she's the strongest wolf I've ever known. Strong enough to survive trauma that would have broken lesser wolves. Strong enough to make impossible choices to protect herself. Strong enough to face her deepest fears and choose love over safety." A murmur went through the crowd. This wasn't the typical recitation of accomplishments. 1 year ago, she saved her pack from a rogue attack, while everyone believed her to be powerless. Kieran continued. "She killed 3 rogues single-handedly to protect the vulnerable. Since then, she's defended our borders, negotiated treaties, and won the loyalty of warriors who initially doubted her. She's proven herself 1,000 times over." He took her hand, his grip warm and strong. "But more than any of that, she's my mate. The other half of my soul. The moon goddess chose her for me, and I would choose her again every day for the rest of my life. She is worthy not because of her bloodline or her accomplishments, but because she's Sera, and that's enough." Sera's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. After a lifetime of being told she wasn't enough, not whole enough, not normal enough, not strong enough, hearing those words from him shattered something and rebuilt it stronger. The head elder stepped forward, studying them both with those ancient, knowing eyes. "The bond between you is strong," she said, "forged in truth after growing from deception, tested by fear and strengthened by courage. This is as it should be." She turned to address the assembled crowd. "Some have questioned this Luna's worthiness. They point to her deception, to the years she lived behind a mask. But I ask you, is it not greater courage to survive by any means necessary, and then brave enough to cast aside that survival mechanism when others needed you?" The rhetorical question hung in the air. Sera Lightwood chose survival when the alternative was unbearable pain, the elder continued. "But when her pack needed her, when innocents would die without her intervention, she chose sacrifice. She revealed herself knowing it would cost her everything she'd built. That is the mark of a true Luna one who puts her pack above her own safety." She raised her hands, and power thrummed through the hall, old magic, ancient as the moon itself. "I have seen your future, Luna Sera. I have seen the trials ahead, the enemies who will challenge your rule, the darkness that will test your bond. But I have also seen your triumph. You will lead this pack through blood and battle, through loss and victory, and you will emerge stronger." The elder's eyes fixed on Sera with unsettling intensity. "Your mother's story ended in tragedy, but you have written a different ending. You have proven that the mate bond is not a weakness to be feared, but a strength to be embraced. And in doing so, you will teach others who've been afraid to trust in fate." She lowered her hands, and the power receded. "Kneel, Sera Lightwood, and receive the blessing of the moon goddess. Sera knelt, her heart pounding. She felt Kieran's presence beside her, solid and unwavering. Through their bond, his strength flowed into her, steadying her nerves. The elder placed both hands on Sera's head. By the power of the moon goddess and the authority vested in this council, I name you Luna Queen of the Northern Territories. May your rule be just, your heart be strong, and your bond be eternal. Rise, Queen Sera, and claim your place. Sera stood, and the hall erupted in cheers. Warriors pounded their fists against their chests in the traditional salute. Alphas bowed their heads in respect, and even those who doubted her joined the celebration. Kieran pulled her into his arms, kissing her thoroughly despite their audience, claiming her as his before all witnesses. When they finally broke apart, Sera turned to face the crowd, no longer hiding, no longer pretending, no longer afraid. She was their Luna Queen, and she would lead them with the same courage that had brought her to this moment. I won't pretend my path here was noble, she said, her voice carrying through the sudden silence. I lied. I deceived good people who showed me kindness. I hid from the very destiny the moon goddess designed for me. Those are facts, and I own them. She paused, meeting eyes throughout the crowd. But I also survived. When trauma threatened to destroy me, I found a way to keep living. When my pack needed me, I broke my own chains to save them. And when my mate found me, I chose courage over fear. I chose to trust in the bond, even knowing the risks. Her hand found Kieran's, their fingers intertwining. I'm not perfect. I'll make mistakes. There will be days when the old fears resurface, when I doubt myself. But I promise you this, I will fight for this pack with everything I have. I will stand beside your Alpha King and face whatever comes, and I will never, ever hide again. The cheers this time were deafening. Sera felt the acceptance wash over her, felt the pack bonds clicking into place as they recognized her as their Luna, not just in title, but in truth. It was overwhelming and beautiful, and everything she'd never let herself hope for. As the ceremony concluded and the celebration feast began, Sera found herself swept into conversations with alphas and diplomats, all eager to curry favor with the new Luna Queen. But through it all, Kieran remained at her side, a constant anchor in the social storm. Later, when they finally escaped to the palace gardens for a moment of peace, Kieran pulled her into his arms under the light of the full moon. "Are you happy?" he asked, echoing the question he'd posed so many months ago. "I'm terrified," Sera admitted. "I'm overwhelmed. I'm exhausted from smiling at diplomats. But yes, I'm happy. Deliriously, impossibly happy." "Good." He kissed her softly. "Because I have news that might make you even happier. Or more terrified. I'm not sure which." Sera pulled back to look at him, catching something in his scent through the bond. "What kind of news?" "The healer confirmed it this morning," Kieran said, his hand moving to rest gently on her stomach. "You're pregnant, Sera. We're going to have a child." Time seemed to stop. A baby. Their child. The next generation of the bloodline. The future of the pack. It was massive and terrifying and absolutely perfect. "A baby," Sera whispered, her hand covering his on her stomach. "We're going to be parents. We are." Kieran's voice was thick with emotion. "And unlike your mother, unlike my father, we're going to do this together. We're going to teach our child that the mate bond is a blessing, not a curse. That love is worth the risk." Sera felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but they were tears of joy. "We're going to teach them to be brave, to face their fears instead of hiding from them." "We are," Kieran agreed, "but we're also going to teach them that sometimes survival is its own kind of bravery. That doing what you need to do to keep living isn't weakness, it's strength." They stood there under the moon, wrapped in each other's arms, connected by the mate bond that had terrified Sera for so long. But now, feeling their child growing inside her, feeling the absolute rightness of this moment, she understood what she'd been too afraid to see before. The mate bond wasn't a guarantee of tragedy. It was a chance at something extraordinary, and she'd been brave enough to take that chance. Her mother's story had ended in darkness. But Sera's story, hers and Kieran's and their child's, was just beginning, and it would be written in light. 5 years later, Sera stood in the same medicinal garden where Kieran had first confronted her deception, watching her daughter play among the herbs. Little Alara, named for the grandmother she'd never meet, was 4 years old, with her father's amber eyes and her mother's silver blonde hair, and she was absolutely fearless. "Mama, look!" Alara called, her small wolf ears popping out in the partial shift she'd recently mastered. "I can smell the nightshade from here, just like you taught me. Good girl." Sera called back, her heart swelling with pride. "But don't touch it, remember?" I know. Poisonous unless prepared properly." Alara rolled her eyes with the dramatic exasperation only a 4-year-old could manage. Kieran's arms wrapped around Sera from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "She's so much like you," he murmured. "Smart, stubborn, and completely unafraid of anything." "She's nothing like I was at her age," Sera countered. "I was already learning to hide, to make myself small and invisible. She gestured at their daughter, who was now attempting to climb a tree to get a better view of a bird's nest. "She's everything I should have been. Everything I'm glad I finally became." Through their bond, Kieran sent a wave of love and pride. "You gave her that, by choosing courage over fear, by refusing to let your trauma define her childhood. You broke the cycle, Sera." It was true. Alara was growing up knowing both her parents were fated mates, seeing their bond as something beautiful and strong. She had no fear of the moon goddess's gift, no terror of the future that awaited her when she found her own mate someday. "Mama, Papa," Alara called excitedly. "My wolf wants to come out all the way. Can I shift, please?" "You're too young, little star," Kieran said gently. "First shifts don't happen until you're older. What you're feeling is just your wolf saying hello. But I want to run with you." Alara's lower lip trembled. "I want to be strong like Mama, like when she saved all those people from the bad wolves." Sera knelt down as Alara ran to her, gathering her daughter into her arms. "You're already strong, sweetheart. Strength isn't just about shifting or fighting. It's about being brave, even when you're scared. About choosing love even when it's hard. About being yourself, no matter what anyone else thinks." "Like when you pretended to be blind?" Alara asked. At 4, she already knew the story. Sera had made sure of it. No more secrets, no more lies. "Yes," Sera confirmed. "I was so scared that I hid for a long time. But then I learned that sometimes the scariest thing, letting people see the real you, is also the bravest thing." Alara thought about this seriously, then nodded. "I'm never going to hide, Mama. I'm going to be brave like you." "I know you will," Sera whispered, holding her daughter close. That night, after Alara was asleep, Sera and Kieran stood on their balcony under the full moon, the same moon that had witnessed her mother's tragedy, her own deception, and now her triumph. "Do you ever regret it?" Kieran asked quietly. "All those years you lost hiding from this?" Sera considered the question honestly. "I regret the pain I caused others, the lies I told. But those 9 years made me who I am. They taught me that I'm strong enough to survive anything, even my own fear." She turned to face him, silver eyes meeting amber. "And they made finding you, choosing you, even more precious. Because I know exactly what I'm risking. I know the cost of love. And I choose to pay it anyway, every single day." Kieran pulled her close, their bond singing with perfect harmony. "I would wait 9 lifetimes for you." "You won't have to," Sera promised. "I'm not hiding anymore. I'm not running. I'm exactly where I'm meant to be." And as they stood there, bathed in moonlight, Sera finally understood the truth her mother had tried to teach her. The mate bond wasn't a curse or a cage. It was a choice. The choice to be vulnerable, to trust, to love, despite knowing you could lose everything. Her mother had made that choice and paid the ultimate price. But she'd also known years of perfect happiness before the tragedy, years of love so profound, it had created Sera herself. That legacy of loving fearlessly, of choosing connection over safety, was the real gift her mother had left her. It had just taken Sera 9 years and a stubborn alpha king to understand it. "Mama," a sleepy voice called from inside. "I had a dream about a silver wolf and a golden wolf running together forever." Sera and Kieran exchanged knowing smiles. Their daughter was already seeing the future, already understanding the bonds that would shape her life. "Go back to sleep, little star," Sera called softly. "That dream is a promise from the moon goddess, and promises like that always come true." As Alara's breathing evened out in sleep, Sera leaned into Kieran's embrace, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her back, the warmth of the mate bond wrapping around them like a protective blanket. She was no longer the frightened girl who pretended to be blind. She was a Luna Queen, a mother, a mate. She was whole, and she was finally, truly free. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.